We are going to get you to all of the latest Habs hockey talk that you're here for in just a minute. But while Rick and Michael are getting settled in the studio, I just want to bring you a quick message from our brand new sponsor for the show, Manscaped. So ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to announce that smooth sack summer is officially upon us. When your man is playing in the summer sun, make sure he's groomed from pubes to bum. Thanks to our friends over at Manscaped, he can make this season his smoothest yet. The Performance Package 5.0 Ultra is the ultimate bundle to keep his boys downstairs cool while looking hot. Have him join the 10 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped. With our exclusive offer right here on the show, get 20% off plus free shipping when you go to manscaped.com and use code THPN. It's summertime, and the trimming is easy, right? Hey, the Manscaped Performance Package 5.0 Ultra has everything he needs to prepare for that summer bod. And inside the package, you'll get the star of the show, which is the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra. And Manscaped even threw in 2 free gifts on this package, the Manscaped Boxers and the Shed Travel Bag. So get 20% off plus free shipping with the code THPN at manscaped.com. That's 20% off and free shipping with the code THPN at manscaped.com. Hey, it's smooth sack summer, ladies and gentlemen. Get your mans or yourselves on board or get left behind. Now let's get to the show.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Canadiens Connection podcast here on Rocket Sports Radio, keeping you informed, engaged, and entertained. My name is Michael Spinella, and I'll be your host for the next hour. This is episode 303 of the Canadiens Connection podcast, and I'm very pleased to be joined in the studio by my co-host, who is the founder and the president of Rocket Sports, Mr. Rick Stevens. And how's it going today, Rick?
Well, what a week. That's all I can say. Yep. is what a week. We had our Canada Day celebrations, and there was the Independence Day celebrations. There was free agent frenzy. There's all kinds of signings and a couple of trades, development camps running around the NHL, Jazz Fest in Montreal. But as we turned to July, it is now Season 7 of the Canadiens Connection podcast, and I'm so happy that you're here. I'm so happy that our entire team who supports this podcast, peers on this podcast, it's a huge accomplishment. Recently, we went over the 300 episode mark for the Canadiens Connection, and old-time listeners, the listeners who've been with us for a long time know that we've been doing this a while. Back to 2012, introduced the Habs 360 podcast with Chris G, and we did that. I co-hosted with him for about 250 episodes, and then we changed the format to the Canadiens Connection. But we've been doing this for about a dozen years. Every Saturday afternoon, you're going to get a drop of the Canadiens Connection podcast, and that's going to happen during the season, off season. We're happy to be here for you and bring you the most trusted information you can find in a podcast. And so just want to congratulate you too, Michael. You've been with us a long time. You're fabulous at this, doing some other things with the live streams and whatnot. This is just a joy and a pleasure every week to be here with you.
Well, thank you very much for that. It's a pleasure as well. And congrats to you for doing this for so long. And like you said, even going all the way back to Habs 360 with Chris G there. Appreciate the whole Rocket Sports Media team for helping out here. And today, we just have such a jam-packed episode. You mentioned it being a crazy busy week. I'm still thinking about Demidov, and we'll have to move on from that a little bit here. As like you said, it's the beginning of Season 7, and today's episode is entitled Prospect Analyst Breaks Down Montreal Canadiens' Newest Talent. So in this first segment, We're going to have updates on everything Montreal Canadiens. The summer of love continues. We have some roster updates. We'll take a look at development camp prospects and just some news from around the NHL. In segment 2, we have a very special guest. One Chris Peters who's going to join us alongside Amy Johnson to discuss the Habs prospects. And then in segment 3, it's the Have Your Say segment. We'll turn it over to our listeners and we will ask you this. Our Canadiens Connection question of the week is, the Canadiens have been quiet in the free agent market this week. Is it the right approach at this stage of the rebuild, or do you wish Kent Hughes had aggressively pushed a big free agent signing? We want to hear from you. And Rick, what's the best way for everyone to let us know their thoughts?
Well, listen, you can reach out to us on social media. You can send us an email, but the easiest way is by our Rocket Sports text line. The text line is set up for you to reach out to us 24 hours a day. We give you an easy number to remember. It's 5853-ROCKET. That's 5853-ROCKET. And we're going to feature we got a lot of texts this past week. Canadiens fans were pretty pumped about the draft. We're going to feature some of the texts that we received this past week.
And if you want another way to reach out to us, make sure that you are following us on all of our social medias. We're at Habs Connection on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Plus, we have a website, CanadiensConnection.fm. And to start things off, here's an interesting story that appeared this past week. Actually, there are two interesting stories to get to. To start off, Cole Caulfield threw out the first pitch before a Brewers Major League Baseball game. So did you know that Cole Caulfield, way back when he was very young, was a left-handed pitcher for a while? So it makes perfect sense that he was the one that got to throw out the first pitch at this game. And Rick, what did you think about it?
Well, yes, Cole was a multi-sport athlete, played a little football as quarterback, said he didn't throw that much as quarterback. He just handed it off. But yeah, a left-handed pitcher. It didn't look too bad. It was the Chicago Cubs and Milwaukee Brewers at the American Family Field in Milwaukee. And of course, the tie-in there with the Brewers is that Cole grew up in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. That's about 250 kilometers away from Milwaukee. So it was a nice event for Cole, and his parents were in the crowd, Paul and Kelly. So a lot of fun, and he seemed to, with his Brewers jersey on, seemed to be having a great time.
And as I mentioned, the summer of love continues. You might have noticed some players in the Montreal area this past week. Well, Brendan Gallagher's wedding has happened, and nice to see everyone coming around to rally around their teammate Brendan Gallagher. And big congrats to him on the wedding as well. It looked quite beautiful.
Gallagher and his fiancee then, Emma Fortin, there was a dinner that they all got together. The guys did. Well, I think the ladies got together at one place and the guys got together another place. There was a little bit of a video that was shared by Angela Price. And at the table, there was, by my count, Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield, Carey Price was there, Jeff Petrie was there, Christian Dvorak, Chris Weidman, Phil Deneau was in town, Tanner Pearson, Nate Thompson. Who am I missing? I think somebody mentioned that Artturi Lehkonen was on the way but didn't make the dinner. Montembeault, Harvey Pinard, they were all there. It was absolutely incredible to see current Canadians and former Canadians, all buds, around the dinner table, celebrating Brendan Gallagher and on the eve of his wedding.
So follow our daily Habs posts throughout the offseason via Rocket Sports on Twitter, and check out our exclusive content at InsideTheCanadiens.com. Looking at our roster news, the NHL cap has rose to $88 million for the 2024-25 season. It's about a jump of $4.5 million. from the last season. If you look at the Habs on Puckpedia, they appear to have a little bit over 10 million available in cap space, but that's not including Carey Price on LTIR. That's with Carey Price activated. So it's probably closer to the 20 million range when all is said and done here. I don't remember the last time the Habs have had so much cap space.
Well, we remember that the cap has been flat, a slight increase last year, but this is a good, healthy jump. And for me, what was nice, what I noticed is that as of July 1st, Carl Alsner was officially off the Canadiens cap. We know that Alsner was bought out in 2020, October 2020. There's still some dead money there for the aforementioned Jeff Petrie, also Jake Allen for the coming season at $4.3 million total. But still plenty. Money's not going to be an issue this season for what the Canadiens want to do.
And also just take a second here to mention that Cap Friendly, I believe, is going to be out pretty soon here. We're counting down the minutes, and we'll have to find the next website to step up. Right now, I've been using Puckpedia. It's going to take a little while to get used to that, but we should be able to still bring you lots of great information on the cap.
Puckpedia is a great resource. I've been using it this past year. They have good chats with Hart, the owner of Puckpedia, and he's been great to us, and we'll be glad to promote him as well.
Looking at the Montreal Canadiens qualifying offers, well, they sent out a couple this past week to Justin Barron and Arber Xhekaj, but Jesse Ylönen and Matthias Norlinder were not qualified and have become unrestricted free agents. Jesse Ylönen has signed a contract with the Tampa Bay Lightning. I believe that's a 1-year, 2-way. No news on Matthias Norlinder as of yet, and no updates on Barron or Xhekaj as to their negotiations.
A lot of that was already signaled by Jeff Gorton, but confirmed this past week.
The Canadiens did make one free agent signing this past week as they announced that forward Alex Barré-Boulet has signed a 1-year, 1-way contract worth $775K. This point in his career, Alex is a player that's bouncing between the NHL and AHL. Last year was actually a career high with 36 NHL games where he put up 9 points. I think this is a player that he's going to be an extra. He's not going to play every game. He might be a healthy scratch at times here. And when he does get in, he'll be much lower in the lineup. So it's not groundbreaking. It's just a little bit of forward depth.
Yeah, this is, he won't look out of place if he's put into the lineup. I think this is a guy who is going to be helpful in Laval. Yes, he has a 1-way contract. That just means he gets paid a whole big chunk of NHL money when he's in Laval. He can still be sent there. 27 years old, and almost 300 games of AHL experience, just 60 some odd games in the NHL. Fans in Laval are very familiar with this player. He's been with Syracuse. And is usually a rocket killer, known as that. So Laval fans will be happy to have him on their side this coming season. I think he's going to be a popular player. He's on the small side, but a power play specialist, a playmaking type of player that may be helpful in Laval.
The big news this past week is that the Montreal Canadiens signed forward Juraj Slafkovsky to an 8-year, $60.8 million contract. That's an AAV of $7.6 million. Slafkovsky, of course, took a pretty big step last season, putting up 50 points, including 20 goals. He still has one more year of ELC left where he's making less than $1 million before he gets a pretty big raise here. So this is Kent Hughes taking a big bet on his first overall pick. This might end up being one of the best contracts in the NHL when it's about year 3 or 4 into that contract. It's a big swing here, and I like seeing that from Kent Hughes, but also part of me is wondering what was the rush to get done this summer? I almost would have preferred to see another full season of Uri, but nonetheless, I think a lot of people are very excited about this.
Yeah, this is, I think that one possibility would be to, and from Uri's camp, was to go ahead and continue his upward trajectory and then maybe ask for a bigger chunk of the pie. But that didn't seem to be his goal. His goal, he was very excited. He said, I'm locked in for 9 years with the Canadiens, with that last year of the ALC, 8 years of the new contract. That was his priority. He's happy with that. The money's pretty good. It fits within that tier system that they've set up, that hierarchy with Suzuki at the top, Suzuki and Caulfield at the top, and Slavkovsky fitting right into that. Is he a $7.6 million player next year? No, but he's not going to be paid that. He's still on his ELC. Is he a $7.6 million player the year after? Maybe not. But at this buys 4 years of free agency. So is he going to be worth much more than 7.6 when you get into those free agency years? Probably. At least that's what Kent Hughes is betting on, that contract's going to look better as time goes on. Who's a $7.5 million player? You think of Jesper Bratt, you think of Jason Robertson, is he there yet? No, but he's on a really nice trajectory. Interesting thing about this contract is it's pretty front end loaded, so his salary is going to be in the $10 and $9 million range those first few years. Maybe some criticism about that. I think this is a bet that Kent Hughes was willing to make. This is a bet that Uri Slavkovsky was comfortable with, and there's not a lot of data to go on. Yeah, you mentioned a 50-point season, but for the first half of the season, he was struggling. We talked about it. The light didn't flip. It didn't switch until he was placed at Suzuki's begging on Suzuki's line with Caulfield, and then everything kind of fit, and we saw him take off. So it's up to him to keep that going, and the Canadiens fans aren't going to be satisfied with a 50-point season next season, and aren't going to be satisfied in unless he continues to grow the following season when he starts to earn that big money.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you bring up too. Just one last thing I'll want to mention here. This is still a very young player. When we were talking about him leading up to his draft, one of the things that kept coming up is the ability for him to handle pressure and take the weight of the world on his shoulders. Giving a younger player this amount of money this earlier in his career, that's a lot of pressure, especially in Montreal. So I think we're going to see if he can handle that very well. I think a little bit of concern on my end, at least, that this could be too much too soon. But if there's a player you're going to make a bet on, I think Uri Slavkovsky is a pretty solid bet.
Yeah, I agree.
The Montreal Canadiens also made a trade this past week here, trading defenseman Jonathan Kovacevic to the New Jersey Devils in exchange for a 4th-round pick in 2026. So Kovacevic came over to Montreal as a waiver pickup. He fit in kind of a depth defenseman. It was at a time where Montreal just needed someone on that back end. Since then, and especially this last season, Montreal has had a lot of the defensemen make the jump to the NHL, and they have a few more down the pipeline that are going to look to try to make the team out of camp. So moving Jonathan Kovacevic out makes some space there, and for the New Jersey Devils, you get a pretty solid depth defenseman at a pretty low price.
I liked Johnny Kovacevic when he was a Winnipeg prospect, and I thought it was a very good waiver pickup. And at that point, it was a waiver pickup to fill a hole. Basically, as you said, just At that point, he only had a handful of NHL games under his belt, but came in and fit in pretty seamlessly. It isn't about offense, but he's mobile. He's big, 6'5", 220. He's physical. He can give you, he can match pretty well with whichever defenseman you put beside him. When he first came over, it was Jordan Harris, and how good those two looked together. I thought he was a great teammate, a great locker room guy, and he's just a really interesting person and personality. He's smart. He holds a degree in civil engineering, and last season, a bit of a free spirit. We saw him go on a month-long road trip, a camping trip, with his fiance in California and Arizona and Nevada. Just a really interesting guy. I think this is he was a great ad for the Canadiens. This is a good move to help him move on, and it's a good move to free space. Not done yet, Kent. Not done. Not done. There's still too many defensemen to have to choose from, and the reason it's an issue is because this season there are defensemen who are no longer waiver exempt. Justin Barron is one of those, and if Justin Barron is placed on waivers, he will be claimed. I can guarantee that. So you don't want to lose your assets for nothing. Kent has said that before. So need to do a bit of house cleaning. David Savard could be next. We'll see. But do not wait until September. Otherwise, then you'll know that the return will be much less because the Canadiens will be in a difficult position.
Yeah, you might end up having to take back Tanner Pearson.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good comparison there.
News for this Montreal Canadiens coaching staff. Alex Burrows will not return as an assistant coach. Alex Burrows says he would like to spend more time with his family and will be moved over to a player development consulting role going forward. So this is an interesting development here, isn't it, Rick?
It's a very interesting development. Listen, Alex Burrows was hired as a coach in Laval with zero experience. He was hired as a coach minutes after he announced his retirement, and he came in with his hockey knowledge and enthusiasm and all of that. I don't know that he was all that successful in Laval. He certainly has not been successful in Montreal. We know that the assistant coaches are holdovers. That Marty St. Louis didn't pick his assistant coaches, and that when Marty St. Louis arrived, Alex Burrows was in charge of the forwards and in charge of the power play. The power play has been dismal, and we know that Marty has mostly taken over all of those power play responsibilities, and you wonder what Alex was really doing. There's some conversation about pre-scouting teams. That was kind of dismal because we talked about preparation lacking this past season. So, when you hear a famous person, a politician, say they would like to spend more time with their family, how many times out of 100 does that turn out to be the real reason? Mm-hmm. Maybe one. This just is, the excuse was he lived an hour outside the city and he had to commute and all that. Well, if there's not that many coaches in the NHL, not that many, if this is such a wonderful job to have, then move. If commuting is a problem, move. Anyway, I'm sorry, but I don't buy the spending time with family stuff matched with a person who has been failing in their job. I think it's a nice little slide to get him off the coaching staff into a position where maybe he can offer some advice. Apparently he's going to work mostly with Laval, with the prospects in Laval, and work with the coaching staff in Laval and help them develop. So I wish him luck, but I think this is a good move. And Kent said he didn't know at this point whether they would fill that spot. He was going to have a talk with Marty about whether they want to disrupt that team or not at this point. So that will be interesting, and something we'll have to keep an eye on as we go along. As far as player development, another very interesting move, and that was hiring another player development consultant, or a player development coach in this case, Laurie Korpikoski. He's only 37 years old. Played in Europe to end his career. I remember him with the Coyotes, the Phoenix Coyotes, a little bit. He's based in. He was born in Turku, Finland. He's based in Turku, and that's where he'll be working out of. And just like Frankie Bouillon and Paul Byron and Rammer, they visit the prospects and talk with them and watch their game and go over video with them. Laurie Korpikoski is going to be doing the same kind of thing with the European prospects, and I think that's a really good move. Turku, if that sounds familiar, home of Saku Koivu and now Atos Koivu. So I like this move.
And we have a little bit more news on coaches coming up in our prospect report, so let's get to that now.
It's time for the Rocket Report. The Rocket Sports Media Team is your premier source for information about the Laval Rocket, the AHL affiliate of the Montreal Canadiens, as well as Habs prospects playing in the CHL, NCAA, and leagues around the world. Bookmark thn.com/Montreal to follow our comprehensive coverage of Canadiens prospects.
So each week we like to highlight Montreal Canadiens prospects, and this week we will update you on the Montreal Canadiens prospects attending the annual development camp, as that went down on Tuesday all the way until Friday this past week at CN Sports Complex in Brossard. And of course, one of the big highlights that comes out of development camp every single year is the scrimmage. And just a few moments here, you and I kind of listed out a top 5 players that stood out to us during that scrimmage. But did you have any takeaways you wanted to start off with from this development camp?
Yeah, good to start there. I think that for those who have followed these kinds of development camps in the past, they noticed that this was a very different development camp than has happened in the past, and partly because the Canadiens made the decision. There weren't as many European prospects at the camp. They were said, don't worry about traveling all the way here. Continue to train at home. Some of them were involved in their national selection camps, so they weren't there, and there was a huge number of invitees. I think there's 15 of them, which is more than I've ever seen at a development camp, to fill out the rest of the camp. So it gave us an opportunity to focus on the ones that were there. And still, of the 10 players who were selected at the 2024 NHL draft, 7 of them were at development camp. Now, the big omission is Ivan Demidov. He was not there, but we knew that. He said after the draft that he didn't have his Canadian work visa, and so he wouldn't be able to, at a U.S. one, didn't have the Canadian one, wasn't able to attend. He's on the SKA development roster, and that development camp starts on July 14th. So we'll keep an eye on that for you. But it was, and I guess the other kind of general comment is that you saw players come by. You saw Nick Suzuki address them. You saw Brendan Gallagher. We said Brendan Gallagher and a number of Canadians were in Montreal while Brendan addressed the group. And I think that's very important to make those connections for those young prospects. Some who were attending a Montreal Canadiens camp for the very first time, which must have been an absolute thrill. So I think as far as and you know, there's testing that goes on, there's drills that go on, you mentioned the scrimmage. There's also some bonding there's off-season off ice lectures where they talk about nutrition and sleep and lifestyle habits and those kinds of things. And then there's some bonding activities afterwards. They went go-karting, as they've done the past few years. Apparently Sam Harris was pretty good, made it to the finals. But the king of go-karting for development camp for the past 3 years, the real risk taker, it was Owen Beck. He's owned go-karting. And some of the prospects were amazed at how good he was because he was willing to leave it out there and be a little bit more risky than the rest of them. That was Owen Beck. So, I think a great week. And yes, we in the scrimmage game, we made notes about the guys that kind of stood out to us, and we'll talk about that, and then we've got some audio for you.
Perfect. So I'll just kind of start off with my top 5 here, and I'll let you get to yours just right after. So, of course, Florian Xhekaj was a pretty obvious standout for me. I don't think I realized how much this guy can drive offense and how easily he can score when he really wants to, especially during that scrimmage, putting up 2 goals. He was my top standout for sure. Recent draft pick Tyler Thorpe was also a pretty nice one. Pair of goals as well, and his shot really stood out. So Tyler Thorpe is going to be someone interesting to keep an eye on. Coming in number 3 here, I put down Sam Harris. We've talked about Sam Harris a little bit throughout the past season in our prospect reports, but this is another guy that just seemed very involved in creating offense. It seemed like he was involved on many of those plays that led to the goals. Another recent draft pick here, I put Michael Hage, and you can tell from his size alone, he kind of stands out, and it's the way he uses his size and skill that I think makes a pretty big difference in his game. He's still very raw. He's still going to have to fill out a little bit more, but certainly someone that stood out to me, and I was a little bit surprised at how good he looked compared to some of the guys that have been here for a few development camps already. And to round things out, I wouldn't be doing my due diligence without mentioning someone that's undrafted and just a camp invite. So I'll give a little shout out to Josh Nadeau. This is a player I wasn't really expecting much of, didn't know too much about, but he came in, and I think he did just about everything he could have for a camp invite, trying to make a good impression. He was all over the ice during that scrimmage, so someone that caught my eye for sure. And anyone there that you agree with, anyone that I left off my list there, Rick?
That was a great list. We're going to have a bit of overlap. I just want to, we just talked about Owen Beck, mention him that he looks completely different on the ice than any other prospect. Owen Beck looks like an NHLer, and he's going to challenge for a spot on the Canadiens roster at camp. I'm certain about that. Unfortunately, very early in the scrimmage, he experienced a lower body injury and did not return to the game. Not something serious apparently, but we'll keep an eye on that. But just very different. For me, I couldn't look away from Jacob Fowler. Some of the saves that he made, saves on breakaways. And you know, it's a scrimmage. It's pretty wild. It's not that structured. There was like a 2-on-0. He made the save on the shooter and then made the save on the rebound. Unbelievable. And if you didn't appreciate the saves, the stops he was making, how about that mask he was wearing, which was almost identical, other than the Florida license plate on the back, but almost identical to a mask that Patrick Waugh wore in the 1990s. And I mean, you can say that's pretty cocky to go to development camp wearing a mask like that. But he wanted to show that he was honoring it. It was a tribute mask to Patrick Waugh. I thought that guy's serious. When you're doing that for development camp, you're pretty serious. Just looking at some of my notes, Owen Proetz. He's just violent. We talked about that last week in the scouting report. He chooses violence, and I mean it's a development camp. It's friendly foes. And Michael Hage tried to do a wrap around the back of the net, and Proetz said no, and just laid him out. Terrific. Thorpe I had on my list too. I liked him particularly at both ends of the ice, and on his goal. What a stretch pass by Logan Sawyer. Sawyer looked pretty poised, I thought, for being his first development camp. Florian Xhekaj is just, Frankie Boulian said after the scrimmage today he stood out from the crowd, and he did. He's a disruptor. He goes to the net, had a couple goals, and I think that the Canadiens staff are impressed with his offensive contributions, which are a bit of a surprise. He was very good when he was moved to center with the Bulldogs last season, and got a little taste of playing with Laval at the end of the season. Michael Hage, all you can say about him is how smooth he is. He's a smooth skater, just a smooth player, incredible shot, elite shot. And I saw a bit, you mentioned Sam Harris. He's kind of one of those right place, right time guys with great hands. And the chemistry between Hage and Harris was pretty evident at the scrimmage. So I think that was, and Sam Harris saying he wants to go back to Denver and do a back-to-back championship. Of course, Denver won last year. I liked that as well. Lots of players to talk about, but those were the ones that kind of caught my eye.
And with that, we have plenty of audio to get to, too. And we both talked about Michael Hage here. He's a very interesting draft pick that they took in the first round. I believe that was 21st overall. The audio we have from him, he's talking about wearing the number 9 in minor hockey.
I did wear number 9. I think my dad was a huge Maurice Richard fan, so that's why I first wore it in minor hockey, yeah. I mean, I never got the chance to watch Maurice Richard, but that's why I wore the number. But I think I really liked Max Pacioretty growing up in those days. Him and Carey Price were probably my two favorite players, and I just really enjoyed watching them.
We talked about, we had audio last week in last week's podcast after the draft from Michael Hage talking about what a big Canadiens fan he was, talking about how mad he was when Kreider ran into Price, and talked about it was 3-1, the comeback against the Leafs, being a Toronto guy. But you can tell he's a Canadian through and through. His dad was a big fan of the Rocket. He was a big fan of Carey Price and Max Pacioretty. He's pretty proud to be a Montreal Canadien.
That's for sure. And we also mentioned Florian Xhekaj on both of our top 5s just before here. And let's hear from Florian talking about playing for Laval.
No, it's awesome. I mean, I played one home game there in practice for a week there, and yeah, the rink's unreal, and the fans were unbelievable. I mean, I was walking in the rink and they were yelling, trying to take pictures and stuff. I was like, guys, I gotta play a game. But yeah, no, it's super cool. It'd be an honor to play there next year.
As I said, last season he was moved to center, and that unlocked his offensive potential. Could play in Laval, likely to play in Laval. He has his eyes, and don't bet against him. He has his eyes set on a position on the Montreal Canadiens roster. And not likely to happen, but you can't blame a guy for having his sights at the right place.
And someone that might also have similar sights, Owen Beck, is going to talk about his expectations for the upcoming season.
I just don't want to skip the other Owen.
True.
Two Owens at the same camp. What are the odds of that? But Owen Prost, let's hear from him just before we get to Owen Beck.
I used to watch some old VCR tapes at my cottage, and it was all the old school, or I guess not old school, but I'll say more experienced players. It was, we'll say that. But it was 1950s, 1960s, kind of old style kind of play, and I watched it about 80 times. My parents had to get rid of it because it was, I wouldn't go outside sometimes. I just watch hockey highlights. So I think a lot of the time that's where I got a lot of my game from. It's kind of watching the older style of play. I mean, I don't want to say I modeled my game after Stevens, but I used to watch a lot of Scott Steves highlights, just some pretty big hits. And I mean, Cronwall was always a big guy growing up. It was, being Cronwall. Hopefully, if I get into the league, I get a Here Comes Prots, but we'll hopefully it comes by over commentators.
He's a fascinating guy. And if he's got, to his game, any fraction of Scott Stevens or Nicholas Cronwall, Cronwall, being Cronwalled became a verb, and he said, maybe if he gets to, Prots becomes a verb as well. And I thought it was fun just that he said, he watched old school tapes of old school players, and then he didn't want to offend anybody there in the media, so he said, well, the more experienced players. This guy is a throwback. He's 205 pounds, 18 years old, solid, says that he credits his size, his weight, to being fed 6 meals a day during daycare. He's just a lot of fun, and said, somebody asked him about the music he likes. He said the Beatles and the Eagles. He's kind of an old school kind of guy, and said that before games, puts on the earbuds and listens to Cat Stevens. No relation, by the way. Pre-game, and they said, what are you listening to pre-game? He said Father and Son, which is a great song. But a little bit mellow for pregame. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating guy.
Yeah, too many Owens on my list here. Thank you for bringing me back to Owen Prots there. But yeah, very fascinating and interesting that his music selection doesn't really match up with the physicality at all. I would have taken him for someone listening to like some screamo or some heavy metal since he loves the violence. But hey, I guess he got to relax somehow. He's got a good music choice anyway. And with that, let's get to the Owen I was originally expecting. And this is Owen Beck talking about his expectations for the upcoming season.
Just coming into next camp, regardless of where I'm going to be playing pro hockey. So my mindset is just to prepare myself for that as best I can. Come into the camp and just show what I can provide to either the Canadiens or the Laval Rockets. So just grow my game over the summer. Make sure I'm physically mature enough to, come in and play pro hockey and be able to excel at that level, whether that's the NHL or the AHL.
This guy's different than the other prospect. Calm, mature, clear-minded, focused. He's got his eyes set on a roster spot for sure.
Very, very mature and very stoic. So I appreciate that coming from Owen Beck. The final 2 bits of audio we have here both come from Jacob Fowler. And Jacob Fowler is just someone with a great personality. Here's him talking about whether or not he feels the pressure as goalie of the future.
Yeah, I think anybody that's at this camp, drafted or not, has the same dream of, wearing those colors and playing one day. And, we all have the same goal to bring a Stanley Cup to this organization. And I think, I think it adds a little bit more to the internal competition here with, somebody's going to be that guy that brings this organization where they want to be. And I think it's just something that when you go back to your teams, you're not seeing all these guys day to day. It's what you're doing back at school or at your junior program to put yourself in that position. And to answer your question, it just gives you goosebumps just to imagine that. So try not to think about it too much, but just go back to school and do my job there.
Perfect. The perfect quote. And I should say he delivers that every time. I said when he was drafted that he's going to be a quote machine. He knows what to say each time, even in some of the questions that were asked in kind of a silly way. He steers it. You can hear him start to answer, and then he just uses words at the beginning, and then his brain catches up. He knows what he wants to say, and he goes in a pattern. Just brilliant, very poised, very. I loved the way he said that he thinks of a Stanley Cup. A lot of the guys are thinking more shorter term in their goals. He's thinking of what would it be like to be the guy that helps bring the Stanley Cup to this city. And for him, it gives him goosebumps.
The final bit of audio coming from Jacob Fowler here. He's talking about spending a lot of time signing autographs.
I don't know. I think when I was a little kid, I always wanted to be, have my stuff signed. And I think it's kind of special to be in that position now where people want to take pictures and have your autograph. So just want to make sure every kid got their time. And anything I can do to kind of spread positivity around this organization, I think is pretty special.
Wow. Wow. I think back to when he was a kid and he would have loved an autograph or a handshake from his heroes or a picture. And so he wanted to spend as much time possible to fulfill the dreams of those fans and to spread a message of positivity amongst the Canadiens fan base. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, great mind, and certainly has the right personality for a goaltender in this market. So appreciate every bit of audio coming from Jacob Fowler. I think we're both very excited about this young prospect.
Absolutely.
Moving along here, a little report here has come out. Another disappointing NHL draft for the Quebec Maritimes Junior Hockey League. So when you look at the 2024 draft, no players from the first round are from the queue. The first player drafted from the queue was in round 2. That was Spencer Gill by the Flyers at number 59. That's not looking great. I think that there's a lot of disappointment in this market about that.
There is. It is a concern, and it is something that's being looked at, certainly by the media, but also by the league itself. Just 15 players from the QMJHL selected in Vegas. That's up from 12 in 2023, but still, that's you look at the OHL, 39 players. You look at the WHL, 34 players. And even amongst one of the media, one of the journalists pointed this out, that yes, 15 players were taken, but only 8 of them are Quebecers. The other 7 come from either the Maritimes or from Europe. So that's difficult. And there's also a concern that last year, I think there was about 32 players from Quebec that played regularly in the NHL. So a bit of a concern. What should be done? There have been discussions about changing the queue to more of a the National Development Program like they have in the States and kind of modeling it after. There's all kinds of ideas, but it is something that's actively being discussed, whether changes to the rules or to the league itself. This is something, again, we want to keep an eye on because it's a concern in this province.
Yeah, that's for sure. Some news from the Laval Rocket. The Rocket announced a 1-year, one-way AHL contract for forward Yakov Novak. He was an ECHL tweener last season, bouncing between Trois-Rivières and Laval. This year, he's going to get one-way AHL money. That doesn't necessarily mean he won't be going to the ECHL. It just means that he'll be making the same amount of money regardless. Laval certainly likes their tweeners, don't they?
They do. This is also a player that Chris G liked a fair bit. And yes, I don't think it'll change unless there's a lot of call-ups, injuries, whatnot. He'll probably bounce back and forth between Trois-Rivières and Laval this coming season. As you said correctly, that one-way label doesn't change that in any other way other than the money he's paid.
The Rocket announced one-way AHL contracts for forwards Vincent Arsenault and Laurent Dauphin, defenseman Joshua Jacobs, Vincent Sevigny, and Tyler Wotherspoon, and agreed to terms with a 1-year, two-way AHL contract with goaltender Hunter Jones. So those are a lot of names. One of them that might be familiar is Laurent Dauphin. He was a member of the Rockets in 2021. He spent last year in the NL. Just before that, he was in the Arizona organization, back when they were still an organization. And he was pretty prolific, at least offensively there. The other name I'll talk about for a second is Hunter Jones. This is a player or a goaltender that's split last year between Iowa's ECHL and AHL teams. Seems very typical of this Laval Rocket organization to get a lot of these tweeners, a lot of guys that do have some experience. So I'm curious to see how this is going to turn out.
Yeah, we've heard from Ken Hughes talking about having the right veterans, surrounding young prospects with the right veterans. Do they have the right mix here? Laurent Dauphin is a player that Laval fans know very well. As you said, he had a reasonably productive season, his last season with Laval, and played probably more games than many expected he would for the Montreal Canadiens, 38 in that season, 2021-22. Played in Switzerland, as you said, 38 points in 44 games. So a little bit of offense there. I think that he's a known commodity. He's a player who will be popular with the fans, and they're hoping he's going to provide the right kind of leadership. The other one is Tyler Wotherspoon, and he will provide the right kind of leadership. I like this guy a lot. And a veteran of 616 AHL games, played most recently with the Utica Comets, wore a letter with Utica, wore a letter with Lehigh Valley Phantoms, wore a letter with the Stockton Heat. This is a guy who's going to help your defenseman with leadership. That's a solid signing.
Yeah, for sure. The Laval Rocket also announced the hiring of Daniel Jacob, who returns as an assistant coach. The head coaching spot is still currently vacant, but we kind of foreshadowed this last week when we were talking about how Jacob parted ways with that Washington Capitals affiliate.
It's the Tampa Bay affiliate, the Syracuse Crunch, and at the time, you might wonder, why is Rick reading Syracuse Crunch media releases? Well, that's because every now and again, and not only Syracuse Crunch, the AHL media releases, you're going to find a nugget, and we found a nugget last week that Daniel Jacob was leaving. We said we kind of speculated that he was on his way to Montreal, and that was announced this week. And of course, he, with Joel Bouchard, has been an assistant coach with Laval in the past.
So we're going to take a little look into an update for the search of a head coach for Laval. And just before we get to some audio from Kent Hughes, is there a whole lot that you can tell us at this point?
Well, we know that we don't know how many candidates there have been. There have been quite a few, maybe up to 10 candidates for the head coaching job. Kent Hughes said that he's looking for another Marty St. Louis. someone with good knowledge of hockey, a good communicator, said that he's not opposed to taking a young coach from junior hockey. And we know that the first interviews, the first set of interviews of the initial pool of candidates were done in Vegas, of all places, and that the Canadiens management team that conducted the interviews were John Cedric and of course Cedric being the GM of Laval. Vinny LeCavalier was in on the interviews. All right, interesting, and Eric Crawford as well. So Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton will be involved in when they pare it down to a final group in the second interviews. And that's what we can do. It's proceeding, and we should have some news pretty soon, I would expect.
So let's hear from Kent Hughes about his priority in Laval.
We look at the roster that we have. We look at the key young players that we have, and then we think about how we surround them in terms of leadership, in terms of skill and ability, and give them a chance to win and have that success and make the playoffs and do those types of things. But always, again, with the same, it's not that different than Montreal, with the mentality being like the most important thing for us right now is to make sure we create a really good environment for these young players to develop.
Okay. The primary focus, first, he says, you look at that roster and you're going to look at the key young players. Those are the prospects that they want to develop. You're going to surround them with veterans who know that their leadership, that their role is to provide leadership and to support those young players. But our priority is to create an environment that focuses on development. He said something similar in French, and it was translated on Canadiens.com. He says, at the end of the day, we want our coach in Laval to focus on development. Does any of that sound, and I know I've been harping on this for a while, and some of you have disagreed with me, but does any of that sound like J.F. Houle? He always was anxious to pawn off the development. Not his role, said it would happen in practice, said it would happen with the development coaches that came in and took over practice. He was focused on winning for those good fans in Laval.
Well, you mentioned J.F. Houle, and every time we hear that a former coach somewhere in the Montreal organization has said something with their new team or whatever it is to the media, I'd start thinking about Dominic Ducharme. I'm hoping that this recent quote from J.F. Houle, the brand new head coach of Clarkson University, is not anything like that. So what did J.F. Houle have to say? This is a quote from J.F. Houle. I hope for Laval fans that when the time is right, the team will look for veterans to win the Calder Cup. Unquote. Did he talk about development there? Did he talk about, that they'll jump up to the Canadiens and contribute and maybe win a Stanley Cup? No. He talked about look for the veterans that can help them win the Calder Cup. And I think that is the reason. And we know that Jeff Houle wasn't successful in either role, in development nor in pursuing a Calder Cup. I think he made his own decision to go to Clarkson, but I think that Rocket fans should be rejoicing. That's the real Jeff Houle right there. Yeah, I think that sums it up very well. You can find all of our content about Canadiens prospects at our Rocket Sports YouTube account, InsideTheCanadiens.com. And now it's time to get to our quotes of the week. This one starts off with Kent Hughes, and this was from Kent Hughes' media availability after the opening of free agency, and he's talking about sticking to a long-term plan.
Yeah, I think if we were willing to match the length of contract that some of these players were getting, we would have had players here. But at the end of the day, we're sitting here trying to project into the future, right? Like, as we've said all along, we won't do something that will provide a short-term game at the expense of our long-term plan. And if we commit too long into the future to a player and we end up blocking young players from moving their way up, then I think we're doing a disservice to what we're trying to accomplish. So we went into it knowing the odds were long, hoping that we could prevail, convince people that this was an exciting place to play with, I guess, inferior financial terms. But I think I'm not worried about that when we get to the point that we feel like it's time to really do something in free agency, and we're willing to compete. And we're willing to compete in terms of the term and in terms of a contract.
He apologized at the end there because there was a fly buzzing around the end, his head that he was swatting at. Really important there that he said that they went into this free agency period talking about having to be very disciplined. That they couldn't, they didn't want to go after players who are going to disrupt their long-term plan, and by disrupting, bringing in someone, maybe on a 4-year contract or a 5-year contract that would create obstacles for the progression of their younger players. And he talked about going into this, remaining disciplined with very limited parameters, and they stuck to their guns throughout. And I think that might have been a little disappointing for some Canadiens fans. I saw the meme with the stick and do something on July 1st. But I think this was absolutely the right decision.
Yeah, certainly applaud Kent Hughes for sticking to the plan here. It's very easy to get carried away when it comes to the first day of free agency. We see that every single year, and a lot of teams end up regretting some of their decisions here. So I think stick taps for sticking to the plan and not doing a whole lot there. But in regards to the big news that did come out this past week, Juraj Slafkovsky spoke to the media following the announcement of his new contract, and he's going to talk about his expectations after signing said contract.
I mean, I love Montreal, and I feel like we are on a good path, and I feel like we're building something very special, and I just want to be part of it as long as I can.
So very positive. He was home in Slovakia. The way it was very interesting the way this was all structured. That just a short time before Kent Hughes' press conference to talk about free agency, the Slafkovsky signing was announced, and so that kind of took those people that were banging the drum about nothing was happening. Well, something happened, and it was pretty big news, and it's an 8-year deal, and that's a really big deal for Slafkovsky, for the Canadiens, for Hughes. And you think about the questions that were asked when he was drafted, and now for it to turn into a player who's going to be with the organization for 9 more years, I think this is successful for Slafkovsky, for Hughes, and Gorton, and the scouting staff as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And from here, we do have some news from around the NHL before we head into our first break. Let's start off with the NHL free agency. So much happened, we can't get to it all, but here are some things that Habs fans might be interested in. And to start, the Columbus Blue Jackets have signed center Sean Monahan to a 5-year, $27.5 million contract. That's an AAV of 5.5. He's going to join a former teammate in Johnny Gaudreau, so I can understand it from that aspect. I think the Columbus Blue Jackets certainly do something to improve themselves, which I think it's been a while since they've really done that. So it makes sense there, and I'm just happy for Sean Monahan that he's able to get paid here. He's been a really good comeback story in the NHL.
For sure. But he's left a hole for the Montreal Canadiens. But were they going to sign him to a 5-year contract? No, they just weren't. We heard why a few minutes ago from Kent Hughes.
The San Jose Sharks have signed Tyler Toffoli to a 4-year, $24 million contract. The AAV on that is $6 million. So he's certainly cashing out here, and I saw this contract and I immediately thought this is the San Jose Sharks bringing someone in to play next to Celebrini or Will Smith. So it makes a lot of sense there. Tyler Toffoli gets to go back to California as well. And I guess similar to what you just said before, not a contract that I think made a lot of sense for the Montreal Canadiens.
Yeah, press repeat. I like Monahan. I like Toffoli. I can see how both are going to help the respective teams that they joined. Especially with the young players and adding some offense but for Montreal, 4 years, the money they could afford, but the 4 years, the term is what took Montreal out of these free agent signings.
And the Los Angeles Kings have signed defenseman Joel Edmondson to a 4-year, $15.2 million contract. That's about $3.85 million AAV. That's a lot of money for Joel Edmondson at this point in his career, if I'm being honest. We know Joel is someone that Marc Bergevin likes quite a bit. I wonder if this contract has everything to do with Marc Bergevin over in Los Angeles, but good for Joel Edmondson. Happy for him to get some term and some good money. I don't understand this from Los Angeles's perspective.
Yeah, to answer your question, yeah, it's Marc Bergevin. It's Marc Bergevin, and I like Joel Edmondson. The back issues when he was with Montreal, and since he's had more wear and tear. 4 years, again, it seems, my goodness. And I guess we should talk about the other thing that happened this week in the NHL was the schedule came out, and the 2024-2025 regular season schedule was published, and there's a lot that's interesting on it for the Montreal Canadiens. I think the one thing that I picked out of it was that there are 15 back-to-back games for Montreal this upcoming season. And I think that's second highest in the league if I was looking in the right places. Toronto Maple Leafs have 16. Last season, the Canadiens had 13. So that's 2 more than last year. And I know I harped on this last year. This was a bit of a pet project that I followed this because it was difficult to find the information. But the Canadiens' record in those 13 back-to-back games, second game of a back-to-back, the second game of a back-to-back was they had 13 times. It was 1-12. 1-12. The only game they won was a 5-2 win on just before Christmas, December 22nd, against the Chicago Blackhawks. They lost 12 games that second game of the back-to-back. I talk about a lack of preparation, a lack of a guy who does proper pre-scouting of the opposition. That's part of that is coaching. Part of that is coaching. And if the Canadiens want to be anywhere near, if they want to improve their standings at all this upcoming season, they have to. That's a stat that they have to at least break even on.
And starting the season off in very difficult fashion with a back-to-back, there will be travel involved in that. So they're going to start off against Toronto, and then the second part will be against Boston. And 1 day off before they have to come back home and host the Ottawa Senators. So not starting off the season as easy as you might have hoped with 3 games in what seems like 4 nights there. So that's going to be difficult. And like you said, with all the struggles of back-to-back and trying to get rest and preparation in, it's not going to be an easy feat.
For sure.
Looking at, some final standing projections that came out from Jay Fresh on Twitter. So the analytics Twitter guru, Jay Fresh, has put out his projections for the final standings on this upcoming season. And it looks like the Montreal Canadiens will be at the bottom of the Atlantic.
This isn't, there are lots of folks out there that think the Canadiens, I even saw somebody say the rebuild's not over. That they're guaranteed a playoff spot. This won't sit well with them. Jay Fresh is. These are based on a model. And that model isn't always kind to teams. It's based on the past, so it doesn't maybe take into account the natural or organic kind of improvement, the growth. That's difficult to measure in this model. Will they regress and go to 69 points and end up 31st in the National Hockey League? I don't know, but the Atlantic Division is going to be tough. It was tough last year. It's going to be just as tough or tougher. Most of the teams made improvements. The Canadiens, they're counting on natural growth and fewer injuries, and maybe I should just say fewer injury. The injury of Kirby Dach, that was a big impact on the Canadian season last year. But overall, I think the Montreal Canadiens, their injury numbers are a bit inflated from last year. They weren't really counting on having Chris Weidman or Carey Price in their lineup anyway, and those injury numbers would include that. I don't know. There's still a rebuilding team. There are still players who are not necessarily going to be part of this team that have to be moved. You think of Josh Anderson not contributing, Christian Dvorak not contributing, RHP having a horrible season, Brendan Gallagher not performing to his ability. David Savard maybe is a piece that could be moved. I don't know. I think that will Montreal be 7 points worse? Dach is back. I mentioned it before. Sean Monahan not in the lineup. They lost that. I'm just gonna say it's early July, and we're not looking at rosters yet. The opening night rosters. Let's let this sit for a bit and simmer, and we're not making our bold predictions until September. So let's just take this as I appreciate Jay Fresh's model. I appreciate his information. We'll just gather this over the summer.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said about the Atlantic Division there. And just looking at it in general, I'd rather be the team that's bad on purpose than the team that's bad despite having hopes to make the playoffs, like Ottawa, Detroit, and Buffalo have done consistently the past few seasons. So it's not a bad time for the Montreal Canadiens to go through these motions. And you look at what Tampa Bay's done. Are they going to take a step back at some point? But again, we'll leave that for the bold predictions when we come up on September, and we'll let this simmer for now.
For sure.
Final little piece of news here before we get to that first break. There have been some NHL ELC signings and quite a few from the latest draft. I'll just name out a few here. Beckett Seneca, Berkeley Catton, Zane Parekh are all recently drafted and have already signed their contracts. There are quite a few more, though, weren't there, Rick?
Yeah, Stian Solberg, you mentioned Beckett Seneca with Anaheim, their third pick overall. They were Stian Solberg, their 23rd pick. They got them both to sign an ELC. Berkeley Catton with Seattle for sure. Calgary had a couple in Parekh and Matvei Gradin, 28th, I think. St. Louis had Adam Juracek at 16. Washington had Tarek Parasik. A few more, I think... A few more than usual. In such a short period of time since the draft to have 7 ELCs be signed. Interesting. I don't think that should force the Canadiens' hand to do anything, but just something we noted.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, I think it's a good time to get to our very first break here. Stick around for a message from DraftKings, and then we'll be right back with you. And we're going to have Chris Peters step into the studio with us. This is the Canadiens Connection podcast here on Rocket Sports Radio.
Bet the action on the ice with DraftKings Sportsbook. Hey, listen, just because the Stanley Cup just got awarded does not mean that now is not the best time to sign up for DraftKings Sportsbook if you haven't done so already, because you are going to want to be set to bet all the action on the ice once the season opens again in the fall. Now is the best time to get set up to do that. And hey, there are tons of great sports that you can be placing bets on with DraftKings Sportsbook all summer long, and, kind of learn your way around the app and get comfortable and have a great time while you're doing it. So, hey, download the app now and use code THPN, and new customers can get $150 instantly in bonus bets for betting just $5 on hockey. That's code THPN only on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL. The crown is yours. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, 21 plus age varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. See dkng.com/hockey for eligibility and deposit restrictions, terms, and responsible gaming resources. NHL and the NHL Shield are registered trademarks of the National Hockey League. Copyright NHL 2023. All rights reserved.
Welcome back to the Canadiens Connection podcast, right here on Rocket Sports Radio. I'm Michael Spinella, and you can find me on Twitter at the Spinella. And with me in the studio is our president and founder of Rocket Sports, Rick Stevens. Make sure to give him a follow on Twitter at Rocket Sports. And you can also follow at Habs Connection on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and check out the website canadiensconnection.fm. And just a reminder, if you have not already, make sure that you tap that subscribe button to the Canadiens Connection podcast in the player or on your favorite podcasting app so you don't miss a single episode. And, if you've been with us for the past 7 weeks, you have been treated to some great episodes of the Canadiens Connection featuring the best draft experts in all of hockey. With last week's podcast, episode 302, we concluded our 2024 draft coverage.
But this week, we transition from draft coverage to prospect coverage, and we're going to provide you with some analysis of the prospects in the Montreal Canadiens pipeline. And we're really pleased this week to be joined by the NHL Draft and Prospects analyst, Chris Peters.
Chris is the senior content creator for FloHockey and has been a play-by-play broadcaster for amateur and professional hockey. His prospect work has appeared at Daily Faceoff, CBS, and ESPN, and he has been the communications coordinator for USA Hockey. So we're going to invite Chris into the studio here. He's going to take a sit down with yourself, Rick, and Amy Johnson's going to come in as well to take a deep dive into the Montreal Canadiens draft class of 2024, and I'll send it off to you guys.
Thank you, Michael. Well, that's, the draft. It may be officially done and dusted in terms of everyone has, I think at this point, left Vegas and has headed back to their respective cities to, frankly, begin covering development camp and so forth. But there's still a lot of talk around what happened at the draft. And so we are really pleased today to continue our 2024 NHL draft coverage with another special guest, really tremendous guy with a ton of knowledge and information about prospects. His name is Chris Peters with FloHockey, an NHL draft and prospect analyst. And we are very happy to welcome him to the show today. Chris, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. And obviously, I think it's a very exciting time in Montreal after what happened last weekend.
I think that's the general consensus for sure. But in terms of the consensus, going into the draft, there really wasn't one after Macklin Celebrini. It was hard to settle on really a consensus agreement as to who would pick what, even in the first 5 picks, much less how the first round overall would go. Given that, what were probably the biggest surprises for you that took place in the first round of this year's draft?
Yeah, I mean, I think, judging by the sound of the building when Beckett Seneca was picked, and obviously by Seneca's reaction himself, that was a big one. But honestly, the Ducks had been rumored within the scouting community to be on Seneca for a few weeks. And so when that happened, I was like, okay, that makes sense. I've been saying this, and people can choose to believe me or not believe me because I was the coward that wouldn't do it. But I had a text chain going with Corey Prom, and I asked him, I said, who are you mocking to the Ducks for your last mock draft? And he said, Salayev. And I was like, he's on the board, but I was like, I think I'm going to go with Seneca. And it's like, I just have a feeling the Ducks are going to do something, off, like perceived to be off the board. And unfortunately, I did not have the courage to do it, to go 5 for 5 with the top 5. And so I'll take 4 for 5. But the, I think that was it was a surprise, just because there were so many different ways that Anaheim could have gone with that pick, including Ivan Demidov. And, I think that had Artem Levshinov still been there, I think he might have actually been the pick because of the right shot, quality and all that other stuff. But he wasn't. So they, Seneca was very high on their list, and they took him. The other big surprise to me wasn't, I figured Demidov would probably slip a little bit and be available. The biggest surprise to me ended up being Zeev Buium being the 6th of the top 6 defensemen selected. I think that will ultimately look bad in a few years. I think that will, the team, I did a big piece on FloHockey, kind of reverse engineering the first round to explain how it even was possible that he got to 12th. And I think that was, in the end, he was number 6 on my list, 3rd defenseman overall behind Levshinov and Salayev. And as I was kind of doing things, I was like, gosh, maybe I'm too low on him even at some point. Just because of the season that he had, and what are the lessons that we've learned from the defensemen that are perceived to be undersized? And actually, Buium's 6 foot tall, so he's not, he's average size. He's not undersized. Maybe a little bit below average for an NHL defenseman, but either way, he was a guy that I felt, could be a real impact player. And then, Philadelphia also trades out of the 12th pick. It's an extra 3rd rounder, and Minnesota, to me, gets what I think will be the steal of the draft, even though Aaron Kiviharju, who they drafted in the 3rd round, said he's going to be the steal.
Yes, he did. Very boldly.
Love that. And I really like that player too. But the fact of the matter is I think that allowed Minnesota to be one of the real winners of day one. And it cost them a 2025 3rd rounder to move up the one spot. And I was just like, it's kind of funny. I was like, Philly could have just picked Jet Luchenko, but I think it's good on them to get an extra pick and maybe bait, say, hey, Minnesota, if we, how badly do you want Zeev Buium? So I like that too. But yeah, that to me was a big surprise. I think, some of the other ones, Chicago being so aggressive to get a 3rd first round draft pick and taking Merrick Vanacker, who was a player that I think would have probably gone within the next few picks had they not taken him. They were very high on him, but they used a lot of draft capital to get that player. I thought that Tarek Parasak, who was drafted by Washington, was a little bit of a reach. I like the player. I thought he was a 1st rounder, and I think if you're in the 1st round and this is our chance to get our guy, you make that. But it was a lot earlier than I expected him to go, especially considering that guys like Michael Hage and Sasha Boisvert were still on the board, and I thought have a little bit more of an NHL projectable frame to him and game. But either way, I think it was a really, otherwise I don't think it, based on the way that my board looked, I had 3 guys that were not first round, that were not picked in the 1st round off of my list that I had as 1st rounders, and they all went pretty early in the 2nd round otherwise. So, I think, so for me, there weren't a ton of big surprises based on what we had been hearing and what, I had felt how the draft would go.
So Canadiens fans are interested to hear, the Montreal Canadiens had 10 picks, but all of the focus was on that number 5 pick. The dominoes had to fall just so, and they did. I think it's fair to say that Montreal Canadiens fans are thrilled, absolutely thrilled with the pick of Ivan Demidov, and I think this is the first time where their pick, the fan pick, matches up with the Gorton Hughes pick. Slavkovsky, Reinbacher weren't necessarily popular at first. So I guess Habs fans are thrilled from a scouting perspective. Is that justified? And I think you called him the most skilled prospect in the draft. Just give us your scouting perspective and how you can justify their feelings for this pick.
Sure. I mean, I had him third on my list, and really that's just kind of like the way that I, structure boards. It's usually going to be top center, top defenseman, top wing if they're good enough. Otherwise, it's, more center and defenseman. Typically, that tends to be how it goes in terms of prioritization of position. But yeah, I mean, I basically think that he's one of the most dynamically skilled players in the entire draft. I think Celebrini is certainly in that mix as well. But you look at the hand skills, the playmaking ability, the scoring ability that Demidov has, and it really is one of those guys that I think will be, a difference maker. The one thing I will say, and the reason that I think, NHL teams, at least that we're picking that high, were a little more hesitant, is it's not really so much the Russian factor as it was what can we really know about Demidov when he played in a level that is not very good. This is the highest that a player from the MHL has ever been drafted. And the thing about that league is the quality, I don't think, stacks up well against the CHL, the USHL. It's probably more similar to the U20 ranks in Sweden and Finland and things like that. But it's tough to know. So the thing is that he dominated a level that we expected him to dominate, and we didn't have any international competition to pay it to see where he was. We didn't have any enough KHL games to say how is he going to handle adversity when it comes his way. So that was the thing that would, if you're an NHL team trying to make this huge decision, that would give you pause. Now, the one thing I would say is if there was any team that was going to know him best, it was going to be Montreal. Right. And obviously, Nick Bobrov with his connections, obviously being able to get into Russia, being able to, to be there. It's my understanding that there was at least some face-to-face time in Russia. And so that was, if there was any, if say Montreal did pass on him, I think you would have potentially seen if they know do they know something we don't know? Is there something then he could have tumbled. I think he would have fallen a bit further. I don't think those other teams that were picking right after Montreal were going to take him. And so it would have been interesting. Could he have gotten all the way to Washington? Probably not. But I mean, there are definitely some teams that were given pause. It would have been given pause if Nick Bobrov says, nah, we're not going to do that. So that's exciting as well. And then, you can watch the game film. I think the one, the knock on Demidov is that he is probably an average to below average skater. He's not slow. It's just, he's got a bit of an awkward stride. He does a lot of the 10 and 2 kind of, opening up the hips and different things. And it's just want to see him kind of get north-south a little bit better and a little bit quicker. And I think that could come over time. But the fact of the matter is picking at 5, there are a few players, in terms of overall upside, I think you're looking at a player that in a lot of years could have challenged for number 1. I think that he could have challenged for number 1. This year, let's say he goes to the World Juniors, let's say he goes to the Under-18 Worlds or whatever, or the Hlinka Gretzky Cup, and absolutely, we get to see him peer-to-peer, and he's dominant, that gives us a little bit more comfort in the projection. So the one thing that I'll say, beyond everything else, is that we are projecting him off of a very, a limited kind of evaluation point. And so that is where, there is some pause in terms of how comfortable can we be with our projection? But I think on skill alone, we see a player that has the potential to be special.
Is there a concern that he spends a third season in the MHL? Why wouldn't St. Petersburg want him in the KHL even though he's not, they're not developing him for a future career there, but to help them win.
Right. So here's my thought on. I think St. Petersburg is one of the worst places you could have a prospect in.
Right.
And the reason I say that is because right now, because of the contract situation, Demidov cannot be loaned out. So it's either St. Petersburg at the KHL level or it's their MHL team.
Mm-hmm.
They are a win now team at all times, and that is anti-young player. Their head coach is Roman Rotenberg, he is as much a politician as he is a coach. And that to me is concerning because, they're going to make the decisions that are playing young players is not easy. And I'll give you the reason that I look at this is you've got Torpedo, who had 2 players selected high in the draft that both played significant KHL time in Salayev and Artemanov. And that they're coached by Igor Larionov. And there's a coach that values the development of young players and putting them into positions to succeed.
Right.
The risk of a young player is always there. You have to be comfortable with the mistakes that they're going to make. I don't think SKA is comfortable with that. And I think that that's a reason for concern. I do think that Demidov can help them next season, but he also doesn't help them long term. If he doesn't sign, and I still think that they will continue to try to re-sign him in order to say, hey, do you want to play in the KHL? Here's what's going to take. That is a real concern. That is why I actually thought when I was talking to people and when I was talking to some scouts is the fact that his contract is up next year a good thing or a bad thing? And no one could really agree if it was a good thing or a bad thing. On the surface, it's a good thing because it gets him out of Russia quicker. On the deeper is how much pressure is there going to be on him to sign, and different things like that. Excuse me. So I think that this is going to be a very interesting year. If he ends up in the MHL, I think that does significantly curtail his NHL timeline. I think you would have to sign him and bring him over and probably put him in Laval just to get him used to playing in the in North America. There is no precedent for a player going directly from the MHL to the NHL without significant time. I mean, Nikita Kucherov was one of the best MHL players ever. He still went to the Quebec Remparts in the QMJHL and then still had to play in the AHL after that and become the MVP candidate that he is. So developmentally, another year in the MHL, like I'm a big proponent of, you can develop wherever you're at. What you can't do is you can't rush the NHL timeline when you're at a level too low beneath the NHL, and that's what the MHL is. It's far too low for him to be playing there all of next year and then being an NHL player after that.
Well, after that fifth overall selection, then all eyes, of course, turned to Montreal's second first-round selection. And actually, originally, they had 12 picks going into the draft, but earlier in the afternoon, before the draft even began, Kent Hughes moved up. He made a trade and parted with 2 of those picks to move up from 26th to 21st. And so plenty of speculation. What's he going after? Is he going to try to move up again and get maybe a Cole Eiserman or something like that? But in turn, it turns out that Kent Hughes, according to him, said that their target the entire time was Michael Hage, who they took with that 21st overall selection, played in the USHL. He's already committed to Michigan. You've called him a high-end skilled player. There's, of course, well known that he's a Habs fan. There's also the emotional story surrounding him and his family tragedy within the last year after losing his dad last summer. Just overall, what are your thoughts on Michael Hage as the player from a scouting perspective, and Kent Hughes obviously making moves to want to get that player and what he could bring to the Montreal Canadiens lineup?
Yeah, so I really like Michael Hage. I had him 17th on my list. I think that he is there's so many things about him that I like. Let's go to the on ice stuff first. The speed that he plays with, that is a big element of his game. He backs down defenders. He can, get guys wide. He can, get up the ice quickly. He can be very good in transition. He has a high end shot in a goal scorer sense. I think that showed. The first weekend I saw Michael Hage was at the USHL Fall Classic. The first time I'd seen him live, because he was injured for most of the previous season, and I didn't see Chicago at any point when he was healthy. And to see that first weekend, you're like, oh boy, it's going to be a tough go. And then, I had not heard yet about his dad, and then, started talking around, and, they're just like, this is, how do you play through that? How do you play? Yeah. How do you handle such an emotional loss? And I think that early on in the season impacted him emotionally. But in the end, the reason that I think you make a selection like this and you see the player was the resilience that he showed over the course of the season. He was by far the best player in the USHL over the second half of the season. Production-wise, he carried that Chicago team that was far worse than most of the Chicago teams that we've seen in recent years, where they had, Celebrini and, Matt Coronado, and, a team that was perennially contending for the Clark Cup. They didn't have the depth that they normally do. And so he was dragging them along at various points this season. And, considering the emotional turmoil that he had been through, considering, the fact that he was injured most of last season, lost a year of development, to see where his game got to was very encouraging, and a reason why I listed him in, basically right at the halfway point of the first round, because I think he's only scratching the surface. And, he's going to get stronger. He's going to get, I think, even more explosive as he gets stronger. But the resilience and the different, the way that he got through this season and only got better as the year went on was really, inspiring to me. I thought it was surprising. It was my understanding that Canada was at least looking at him for the Under-18 World Championship, and ultimately chose not to take anybody from outside of the CHL. And so he didn't get an opportunity to play at that level. But I think, if we would have seen him alongside Tija Ginla and Jet Luchenko and all of those players, I think he would have compared very favorably to some of the guys that did end up going ahead of him in the draft. So I think that would have been a great opportunity that we didn't see. But in the end, he ends up staying, and was a very impactful player for Chicago. So, I was actually a little surprised that the Blackhawks didn't draft him one pick ahead, because they had traded up as well. I think that they really liked Jet Luchenko, and then they ended up picking Sasha Boisvert, who was, to me, a very similar range player, also from the USHL, also, a good, tall, goal-scoring center, not quite as quick as Michael Hage. So I like the pick, for both of those teams. I think they both got great centers, but I think if you're Montreal, to me, when I did my draft grades, it was almost entirely because of the first round. I think that Montreal got two very dynamic talents, and to get Hage where they did, I think is a huge win for them, because I thought that there was a chance he was going to go a little bit higher, and it was smart for them to make those moves. I think that they ended up getting a much more impactful player by moving some extra draft picks to move up in the first round.
So then we move to day 2, and for the Canadiens, they didn't have a pick in the second round, skipped to the third round, and I can say that the player that they took, Atos Koivu, is the only player in the draft that I met as a toddler. And that's because they lived across the street on Nuns Island, and see Atos in the playground last week. On the podcast, I told about the incident at IGA when Saku Koivu ran his shopping cart into me, and Atos was climbing all over him. This is an incredible story. Saku Koivu is beloved. But tell us that this is more than just a sentimental pick by the Canadiens.
Yeah, I mean, I think it certainly is, and you know, Atos this was a fair range for him. You know, he was a player that I really hadn't had a great read on because he wasn't part of their Hlinka Gretzky Cup team. You know, he kind of started a little bit later, and then all of a sudden he's on their Five Nations team. That was when I first saw him in Plymouth. Plays on the Five Nations and he plays a top six role, and he's, you know, can be a shutdown center. He had gotten some games in Liga. I think what we saw was a play. I mean, you have to remember he started the year in the U18 ranks in Finland, which, you know, is akin to, you know, I guess like if you're familiar with Canadian youth hockey, I mean like AAA hockey, basically, right? Yeah. You know, so he goes there and then he gets a chance in the U20 league and he produces over a point per game again, and is a goal scorer. The thing about Atos is he is just starting to figure it out. I had him 64th on my list. I think I might have had him higher than most places did, because I think there is tremendous two-way ability. I think the skating is very good. I think the work ethic is off the charts. And then on top of it, he is pretty thin still. He's going to have to get stronger. And as he does get stronger, I think he's going to be a more impactful player. Didn't have an amazing under-18 World Championship. Finland as a whole didn't have an amazing under-18 World Championship. It was one of the weakest groups that we had seen at that particular tournament. But he ends up getting, you know, significant minutes and plays a, you know, physical game, and, you know, even got kicked out of one of the games, so a little too physical. But to me, you know, third round is a great range for him. You know, certainly I think that the sentimentality can maybe give you a little more value if you're the Montreal Canadiens. And you know, I think that this is a player that's on a very steep developmental trajectory right now. He'll probably get more games in Liga next year, and he'll be a more dominant player at the U20 level. He'll have an opportunity to play at the World Juniors if he makes the team. And so you're talking about a player that's on a very steady developmental climb. And so I don't think he would have lasted many more picks had Montreal not taken him there. And so I think in the end, it's a great pick for them. It's the sentimentality, but it's also, you know, where this kid's coming from. You know who raised him. Mm-hmm. You know who he watched his whole life. You know, this is a kid that you know, speaks, you know, multiple languages and is also just a good, you know, good character guy. And so knowing that gives you a little bit more comfort. But I think for sure he was much more than just the that kind of nepotism of we love Saku, so we're gonna love Atos as well. And maybe you will, but I think it was a very fair range for him to be picked there.
Well, sticking in the third round with pick number 78, I'd like to talk to you just for a moment about Logan Sawyer, the winger, who played in the BCHL last year. He is committed in 2 years, I believe, to go to Providence, going the NCAA route as well. I think he pleasantly surprised some folks when he conducted his post-draft interview fluently in French. He's super excited about being drafted by Montreal, calls them, you know, the best franchise, that they've got the best jersey, just really seemed to be genuinely thrilled and over the moon about being selected by Montreal. So tell us a little bit about why fans should be just as excited about Logan Sawyer as he is about coming to Montreal.
Well, yeah, you know, I think he was one of the players that I listed for next season, or for this draft. I had him in my top 100. You know, so obviously I like the player quite a bit. Had a chance to watch him a lot in his excuse me, I might have the Vegas flu, I'm not sure. But the watching him, so it was a bit of a weird season for Brooks because they started in the AJHL, and then there was basically they announced, those AJHL teams announced they were going to leave the AJHL for the BCHL, and
Being
the
absorbed,
AJHL said you can't play anymore, and the BCHL was like, well, how about you just come play here now? And that's basically what happened. And Brooks has obviously been one of the most productive Canadian Junior A programs in recent memory. Lots of players, obviously Cale Makar being the most famous among them, that have come through that program and become NHL players. I actually think that Sawyer may be heading to Providence next season and not in 2 years. I don't have that confirmed, but I believe that he at least has been on campus and getting ready to potentially play there. So I'd have to go and confirm that. But the fact of the matter is regardless of where he played, AJHL or BCHL, and the BCHL games were essentially just against the AJHL teams that were also leaving for the BC next year. He always stood out. I think he plays with jump. He's got skill on him. I think that as he gets physically stronger, he's going to be tougher to knock off the puck. But every game that I saw, he was a player that I had circled. We have the AJHL and the BCHL on FloHockey, so so I was able to catch a fair amount of his games just in the course of my work. And again, he was just one of those guys where like every time I watch this player, he pops. And so, I had him as basically a third or fourth round pick on my list. Again, another player that I think I was probably a bit higher on than most, maybe because I just got to see him a bit more. But I think he's the type of player where, he's obviously got the personality. I think everybody saw that at the draft. I think he's got tremendous confidence. And then on top of that, it's just a matter of him getting stronger. The other thing that I like is, Providence College has been a really good finishing school for getting players to play on both sides of the puck. Like if you can't defend, you can't play there. And that's even if you're a highly skilled player like Logan Sawyer. So he's going to get that extra tutelage under Nate Lehman at that school and get better off the puck, because I think that's probably the area of his game that he's going to need the most work on, and an area that he wasn't particularly challenged in last year, just because I think Brooks had the puck a lot. So I'm very excited to see what he does as a player, as a prospect, and if he does end up at Providence next year, I think that's all the better for, in terms of timeline for when he could sign a contract. It would be probably within 2 to 3 years where he could start thinking about signing that player. So all in all, like the pick a lot. Each of their top 4 players were guys in my top 100. So definitely liked what Montreal did with the picks that they had.
You mentioned the BCHL being on FloHockey. I think every league, if you're looking for some obscure league and games, everything is on. If I can just do a little commercial for you here, on FloHockey. If you're interested in prospects, you got to check out the site both for your analysis of picks, but also if you're looking to watch some of these games, a tremendous resource for sure. And I guess with that, those were the first 4 picks, and we said the Canadiens had 10 in all. Of the next 6, we're not going to stop in on each one of them. Is there one of those 6 who you're going to be keeping an eye on that you're most intrigued with?
Yeah, it's actually one of the picks that they made pretty late, 6th round, 166th overall. And the reason I'm probably picking him is because I know that he's going to be on FloHockey next year too. But that's Ben Merrill. Played prep school hockey this year. Very, very talented player out of St. Sebastian's, and got a couple of games in the USHL this past season. And the fact is that at his size and also at his age, he's a bit old for prep school. He was a late 05 playing prep school hockey. I think that those players, should dominate the level that they're at, which he did. But now he's going to go to Penticton in the BCHL next year. And he's a Harvard commit. So, this is a guy with a longer timeline. But at 6'4", almost 200 pounds at already coming out of prep school, I think that he's a player that you say, okay, well, He's got the size. There's definitely some skill there. There's some scoring ability. Now he's got to round out the rest of his game and play at a higher level. I think the BCHL next season will be a better league. It'll be more challenging. The introduction of the Alberta teams are going to make for a much more competitive and difficult league to play in. I think that there's a lot of people out there that I think have been critical of the BCHL breaking away from Hockey Canada and basically kind of running things the way that they want to run it. And I think there's certainly merit to that, but at the same time, there's the opportunity for that league to improve. And so, to see they are getting more American players, they're getting more players from other provinces, they're getting more import players, and that, I think will ultimately up the competitiveness of the league. So, I think he's the player that I'm probably most intrigued by. Montreal's day 2 after the third round, it wasn't like a lot of guys that I had a deep book on, and that includes Merrill. I mean, I'm not anti-prep school guys by any means, but it's really hard for me to get into watching those players when we're focusing so much on the very top of the draft with the work that I do. I want to try to make sure that, the top 100 players are as close as I can get to what they'll be. And, that tends to leave some of these prep school players out of it. But, I at least was familiar enough with the player to say, hey, there's something there. There's something there, and I'm excited to see what kind of comes out of it and how he's going to perform at the BCHL. So that to me was the pick that intrigued me the most with in terms of upside, in terms of the potential there and where he's going next. So Ben Merrill at 166th overall.
Love that. I worked at a prep school for years, so I love that prep school level. St. Sebastian's with Ben. The listeners will know I was a big cheerleader for Dean Letourneau until he was taken by the Bruins.
Of all
so
people.
No more. Can't do that anymore.
No, dead to me. Absolutely dead to me. Listen, you're going to take a breath, and just a breath, and then you're going to start focusing on the 2025 NHL draft. If you can just, I think maybe there's a player that you're looking at for that 2025 draft while we're watching. While Canadiens fans are watching Jacob Fowler at Boston College, you're going to be watching somebody else that may be one of the top picks of the next draft.
Yeah, so, I think, to me, James Higgins is starting the year as the number one guy. Starting 2025, he had over 100 points at the national team program last year. Is basically going to take over for Will Smith at the probably as Boston College's number one center next year. Wouldn't surprise me to see him just end up sliding right into that top unit with Gabe Perreault and Ryan Leonard if Ryan Leonard is still going to be going to BC next year. I think that there's going to be a lot of excitement about that team in general. They've got enough returning players and enough talent in their mix to with Jacob Fowler as well being a big part of that. So we've obviously seen the last few years where college players have more frequently become the number one overall pick. We just saw it with Macklin Celebrini, saw the number 2 pick with Artem Levshinov, Owen Power a couple years ago. I think it is real advantageous for those players to play at that level because it is difficult. And if you can dominate that level as a draft eligible, it says a lot about your ability and where you're going to go in your career. And so, James Higgins is going to be that guy next season. But really, I don't think that we have as firm a consensus for number one overall next year as we did at this time last year with Macklin Celebrini. And that speaks to the depth and the talent of this class that's coming up. There's still a lot that we like. I can't really say too much about the depth because there's too much we don't know about the class. But I can tell you at the very top of this class, you've got James Higgins, you've got Anton Frundell, a center out of Sweden, who I saw at that Five Nations tournament and came out of that saying that is the best player here. That was a U18, and then unfortunately a couple weeks later he got injured and wasn't able to play in the under 18 Worlds. Frundell is a power center. I think he's going to be a guy that people are going to get really intrigued by really fast. He's going to play a lot in Sweden. Porter Martone, who had a tremendous under-18 World Championship, Captain Canada, the gold medal. Big 6'3", 6'4" guy with skill and hockey sense and a lot of talent. I think he's going to be the other guy that we're going to be talking. I think those three are the most likely to be in that conversation. But you never know until the season starts, and we'll see other guys kind of pop in there. But
there's even a Memorial Cup winner.
Exactly. Yeah, you've got Michael Misa, who is the exceptional player, yet he's not really even in the discussion yet. About being number one. So you've got all that kind of in there. And I think the Erie Otters are going to have a couple of guys that are really good. You're going to have some players in the USHL again this year that are high profile guys. So really excited to see what happens, where it all goes. But yeah, I think 2025 is going to be a real exciting draft once again.
Well, we certainly hope you get a little bit of, as Rick called it, breathing room, and a little bit of time to recuperate before launching into next year's draft, because we know what great work you do at FloHockey all year long. Really excited about the prospects that are coming for next year, but really appreciate you coming on to the Canadiens Connection today, because the breakdown that you gave of the selections that the Habs made this year just really knocked it out of the park. So thank you very much, Chris Peters, for joining us today. You can find him on Twitter. I recommend him as a follow on Twitter for sure. You can find him at Chris M. Peters on Twitter. Of course, check out FloHockey and all of the coverage that you can get from them at flohockey.tv. And Chris, we just can't thank you enough again. This was a terrific conversation.
Yeah, well, hey, it was my pleasure. Thanks for the good conversation, and also appreciate that this wasn't on video, because I look like I've been in Vegas for a week. So, yeah. But thank you so much, and it's my pleasure. I think it's a really exciting time, and I think Habs fans should be thrilled. So thanks for having me. It's great to chat with you.
Big thanks again to Chris Peters. Appreciate that. Really good information there all around, and loved listening in and sitting in on that. Thank you for taking the lead on that as well there, Rick.
Yeah, a great interview with Chris. He provided information on the top four prospects that were taken, the Canadiens prospects that were taken at the last draft. And you heard me throw it out to him and say, who are you most intrigued by in the others? And he added Ben Merrill there. What we didn't mention is that Chris did an analysis and gave out grades to all teams, and he gave the Montreal Canadiens an A+ for their draft, and that's got to sound pretty good to our listeners. Now, he said that was mostly based on their day one selections in Demidov and Hage, but fascinating, and we'll have Chris back as the season goes on. And as you heard, he's already looking at and preparing for the 2025 NHL draft.
So we appreciate all of his time and expertise there. And just before we head into our final break, we have our Canadiens Connection question of the week that we wanted to ask to all of our listeners. And we will ask you, the Canadiens have been quiet in the free agent market this week. Is it the right approach at this stage of the rebuild, or do you wish Hughes had aggressively pursued a big free agent signing? We want to hear from you, and we'll give you this break to take a moment and think about it. It's our final break here. Make sure that you stick around with us. We are the Canadiens Connection podcast here on Rocket Sports Radio.
The Canadiens Connection is proud to be a partner of Rocket Sports Media, digital media publishers of sports and entertainment websites. Their mission is to build a worldwide network of sports fans who are informed, engaged, entertained, and connected. Learn more about RSM, its team, and its portfolio of brands at rocketsportsmedia.com. I bet you enjoy sporting your best Habs jerseys, dressing up your kids and pets in the cutest Habs gear, and showing off your decked-out hockey cave or fanning. Well, don't just show your friends, show your Habs. The Rocket Sports Media team wants you to boast your finest pictures for our global network of Montreal Canadiens fans. Include the hashtag #ShowYourHabs when posting your fan photos on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Then log on to showyourhabs.com to see your entries, along with photos and posts from Habs fans all over the world. A proud member of the Rocket Sports Media Network. If you're a business owner looking for the perfect platform to reach a targeted audience of customers, Rocket Sports Media is the solution. Our global hockey community provides unmatched social media reach to an attentive demographic of sports and entertainment fans. We can provide visibility to your company, helping you to engage and leverage this prime group of potential clientele. In addition, we also offer sponsorship opportunities for fan events and featured areas of website content, giving you name and logo recognition. Visit rocketsportsmedia.com to contact us regarding this unique marketing opportunity. For the most trusted source of news, analysis, and features about the Montreal Canadiens, log in to thn.com/Montreal, your year-round source for anything Habs related. That's thn.com/Montreal.
Welcome back to episode 303 of the Canadiens Connection podcast here on Rocket Sports Radio. You can follow at Habs Connection on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Plus, check out the website canadiensconnection.fm. And feel free to text us anytime via the Rocket Sports text line. 5853-ROCKET is the number. That's 5853-ROCKET. And once again, I just want to give a little shout out to Chris Peters for lending us time out of his busy schedule. I know that as a draft analyst, he probably doesn't get too much time off. And you mentioned as well that he's already looking ahead to next season. So we appreciate lending all that time and expertise in that second segment.
Thanks, Chris.
So it's going to be a busy offseason. It's already been a busy offseason, and here's what you need to know from Rocket Sports. We cover the Montreal Canadiens, and you can find all of our content at InsideTheCanadiens.com, and we cover you can find all of our Canadiens coverage in one place. You can also find it on our YouTube channel. Just search @AllHabs, and you'll be able to pull that up as well. On there, we have several different things that we do throughout the week. Each week we put out this podcast on our YouTube channel. Last week's was entitled Ivan Demidov, the Montreal Canadiens Game Changer. Make sure you check that out every single Monday. Like if you like what you heard, subscribe if you are looking for more content. Leave a comment as well. We appreciate hearing from everyone. And plus, you can tap that notification bell if you want to be the first to hear about any bit of new content that we put out. Also, look out for episodes of the Rocket Hockey Report and the Habs Hockey Report throughout this busy offseason. And those are hosted by Amy Johnson. She does a great job, and you can even go back and watch some of the older ones that we had throughout this past season. Lots of great and relevant information within that. Make sure you are also subscribed to the premier Rocket Sports Radio podcast on your favorite podcasting app, The Canadiens Connection. You can find every single episode at canadiensconnection.fm. We're here every single Saturday, even throughout the off season. Even during the season, we never go on vacation or take any breaks. You can look out for episodes every single Saturday. If you enjoyed our show, you can show a little bit of appreciation by leaving us a 5-star review. If you want to help us out just a little bit more, share our podcast on X, Facebook, Reddit, or on any of your socials. We are your inside link to the Montreal Canadiens. And with that, I think it's a good time to turn it over to our listeners. So our Canadiens Connection question of the week is, the Canadiens have been quiet in the free agent market this week. Is it the right approach at this stage in the rebuild, or do you wish Hughes had aggressively pursued a big free agent signing? We want to hear from you. If people have a little bit more to say and they want to reach out to us by email, Rick, I believe we have an email they can reach out to us by as well.
That's right. You can send an email directly to us, hello@rocketsportsmedia.com. The email address one more time, hello@rocketsportsmedia.com.
And we have tons of messages, text, tweets, and emails that come throughout the week, even comments on YouTube. And we'd like to share some of those that we received from last week's episode. It was in reaction to episode 302 of the Canadiens Connection. And this first comment, short and simple, coming from Paul on West Island. Paul says, great work on the draft podcast, Rick. So a little bit of appreciation for you on that one.
Well, thanks very much, Paul. I think that it's a team effort. And the other thing, I know I ran through some of the scouting reports. last week on the Draft Podcast. But those are supported by the experts and some of the experts that we had on the show in our pre-draft coverage. Jerome Berube, Sam Cosentino, Russ Cohen. Those are the guys that we have as guests on the podcast. But at any time, I can reach out to them and say, "Hey, what do you think about this? What do you know about this?" They're the real experts, and I'm really proud that we have such a good relationship with them.
And I'll let you take it away. This next one coming from Jake in Montreal.
Jake says, I've never been so pumped about a draft selection in forever. There was one or two tears of joy. Demidov at 5, the future's looking pretty. Also extremely happy about Hage at 21. This draft from Montreal is A++. Thanks to Kent and Jeff Gorton. Montreal is in good hands and are looking really good. I'm loving life right now. Demidov, how about Demigod? Hi to Rick and Michael, and keep up the good work. Love y'all.
Great comment there. The next one comes from Jerome in Verdun. Jerome says, awesome job on the draft coverage, guys. So happy I found your podcast a few months ago and pumped with this draft. Demidov, Hage, Koivu, couldn't ask for more. And thank you. And we appreciate all newer listeners. We appreciate that you listened to our podcast a few months ago and you stuck around with us. We'll continue to do our best and give you some great coverage here.
We had lots of texts just like that. There was one also. There was no name on that. We just to mention, if you want us to read these on the name, just leave your first name and your location, and that helped. But he said, and it came from a Montreal number. He said, I told my friend, you're not going to find a better podcast for Canadiens draft analysis. And we appreciate that. And we appreciate, as I said, the guests that we had and being able to give you absolutely the best coverage possible. We'll leave the Rocket Sports text line for a minute and check in with Facebook. And Tim in St. John, New Brunswick is always one of my favorites to hear from because Tim sits back and thinks about things and ponders things and asks questions. He puts out little hypotheses and says, okay, throw holes, shoot holes in it. Tell me why I'm wrong, kind of thing. Fascinating stuff from Tim. He's talking about this in reference to the Slavkovsky signing. But Tim says, hi, it's Tim from St. John, New Brunswick. I've not been this excited about the Habs' future in a long, long time, if ever. So I'm having some thoughts and wanting to run them by you for your valued opinion. As the Habs have a clear pay structure for the top line that sets a threshold, will the following apply? And then he goes on and subdivides. I won't read all of it. But he first says, can these contracts be renegotiated if the salary cap increases, or if he says of that trio, and I talked about the salary structure and Suzuki and Caulfield, now Slavkovsky, in order, in tiers, in a hierarchy. If they have a really good year, if they become underpaid, can it be kind of renegotiated? Call it a goodwill option by the Habs. Not something. Once the contract's there, it's there, and that's typically made up afterwards. He then asks, what about a future free agent signing that requires, in order to bring them in, requires a salary above that threshold, and will that impact team culture? Thinking of Demidov as well. That happens. You keep your salary structure in place for as long as possible, but sometimes, if you have to make a push, you have to make a push. But if the Canadiens are in that situation, they're contenders at that point. So I think that's a good problem to have. And then he talks about, what about the defensive stalwarts? Should there be a threshold? Should there be a tier system with respect to the defenseman, or should it apply to the overall team? And And I think that's an interesting question to set up a tier system within defense, but I think it would probably end up applying overall to the team. He goes on and says, I'm thinking about the moving parts and internal management of such contracts in the long term. Please shoot holes through my ideas and set me straight. Always love the podcast and your feedback. Well, we love your comments. We love your questions. We love your feedback. So thank you to Tim for all that.
Yeah, we appreciate all of that. Canadiens Connection has been a trusted source for the past 15 years here, and we'll continue to bring our expertise along throughout Season 7 here. Once again, congratulations to you, Rick, and the entire Rocket Sports team on a good 6 seasons of the Canadiens Connection, and looking forward to more of Season 7 here. We've got some wonderful plans for Season 7, so stick with us. Tell your friends, subscribe, and share the podcast on social media. So that's going to be a wrap for us today. Thank you all for listening. Make sure you are subscribed to the Canadiens Connection podcast in the player or on any of your favorite podcasting apps. You can also share it on social media if you like what you heard. Enjoy the week, and we'll be back here next Saturday, July the 13th, for another great episode. Thank you for listening to the Canadiens Connection podcast here on Rocket Sports Radio.
Click subscribe so you never miss an episode of Canadiens Connection. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Rocket Sports.